barrister at Matrix Chambers and a mission rapporteur to the International Bar Association of Human Rights and the Institute's delegation to Sri Lanka. And Michelle has a pretty long track record of working in human rights law, went to Sri Lanka earlier this year in that context, and to some extent was able to see a little bit of what was going on out there. I think you're going to talk to us today about the rule of law and independence in the legal profession, the judiciary, but more specifically the legal profession itself. So I'll just hand over to you, Michelle, if you could take it from
February, the first week of March. So at the time there was a very heightened security situation there, and that meant that unfortunately we were very much restricted to Colombo and weren't able to access either the camps or really anywhere north, and so for that reason we weren't able to deal with the prevailing humanitarian issues, which are clearly very pressing. While we were there though, we were able to meet with representatives of the government, with judges, with lawyers, civil society activists, journalists, as well as representatives of different foreign embassies and international organisations. So while we were there, we looked at obviously issues to do with the freedom of the press. I won't deal with that today. Thomas has admirably done so. And I'll also limit discussion as to the judiciary just due to time constraints. However, I will deal with this gentleman's point at the end when we have time. So essentially, the delegation found that there was an escalating climate of fear amongst members of the legal profession in Sri Lanka. And these are particularly the members of the legal profession who are at risk, are those who either conduct fundamental rights cases before the Supreme Court, or those who represent Tamils in terrorism-related cases, or those who conduct cases against the government relating to bribery or corruption. And essentially, these people have been subject to a prevailing climate of intimidation, of threats, of physical attacks over the last few months. These are not isolated events. Sadly, they're merely part of a wider pattern of intimidation, which is expressed routinely against all stratas of civil society in Sri Lanka, including journalists, academics, NGOs, essentially anyone who is critical of the government or of its policies. They obviously have a very chilling effect on the number of lawyers who are willing to champion human rights causes, and for that reason they have a much wider impact on the rule of law in the country. So in terms of the types of attacks that have happened against the legal profession in the recent months, they've originated from very different spheres. A range of them have come from the police, a range have come from the Ministry of Defence, and others have come from unknown groups of individuals who are sort of colloquially referred to as death squads. So in terms of police, usually lawyers are threatened when they're visiting police stations. These threats can range from relatively minor things such as threats that if they attend court, their family members will be harmed or killed, to actual abuses, attacks, physical attacks, even within the police station, in full view of other police officers in broad daylight. In terms of the death squads, more recently there's been a notice posted by a group which is calling itself the Battalion of the Ghost of Death. And this group has posted this notice in every single court in Sri Lanka, and has also posted it individually to a lot of the prominent lawyers who undertake human rights causes, saying that essentially all of these individuals are traitors, and that they will meet the same fate as the terrorists, and they will be killed. So obviously it's quite an alarming situation for your standard lawyer going along to try and represent a person in court. Even more alarming is the fact that some of this climate of intimidation is originating from the Ministry of Defence. In November last year, the Ministry of Defence published on its website an article entitled Who are the Human Rights Violators? And this article listed 8 case studies in which there were essentially terrorism-related cases, in which it said that all of these people were disgraceful terrorists, and all of their lawyers were also Tigers or LTT supporters, and not only are the clients human rights violators, but their lawyers are as well. This article is obviously a a huge threat to the rule of law in Sri Lanka. The Bar Association of Sri Lanka has made representations to the government to have it removed. The International Bar Association made representations to the government to have it removed. The government assured us that in fact the article was not on the website, even though of course it was. And just before I left the office I checked and it still features prominently on the website. So it's essentially inciting more further threats and killings against lawyers. In terms of physical attacks against lawyers, thankfully this year nobody has been killed yet. However, 2 prominent lawyers have been attacked in quite an alarming fashion. Mr. J.C. Wellimuna, who is one of the most prominent and bravest human rights lawyers in Sri Lanka, had his home being subjected to a grenade attack recently. The day before he was due to make representations on behalf of another lawyer who had similarly been physically attacked by unknown perpetrators. Other lawyers have had their houses burnt down, their offices burnt down. Routinely lawyers are finding unknown people who, well, meant to be unknown, but actually they know that they're police officers in civilian clothing, sitting outside their offices for hours in the kind of famous unmarked white van, which of course is the primary modus operandi of the government for abducting individuals. The governmental response to this culture of intimidation has been dismal and slightly underwhelming, to say the least. Unfortunately, there have been investigations opened into these attacks, but so far there's not been a single arrest of months and months of intimidation. The government says that there are no eyewitnesses to any of the attacks, and it's for this reason that no perpetrators have been brought to justice. However, this is pretty hard to believe, given that almost all of them have taken place in public places in broad daylight. The other slight difficulty with this climate of impunity is that even the champion of lawyers in Sri Lanka, the Barrister,